Greetings, everyone. It seems like it's been a long time. Uh, oh, some new faces. Carter, wow, good to see you. Um, yeah, it's been great. I had a wonderful time. So it was nice. I was usually I try to make it work, but the time frame wasn't going to do it, and it was nice to have a break. And Actually, I went to this retreat in Barcelona, outside of Barcelona, and that will be, in a way, kind of going into the topic of the evening. I had met this couple, Galia and Boaz, in Israel when I went to Israel in 2017 to speak at the first Israeli psychedelic conference. Carter's not hearing anything. It must be on your end. Are other people hearing stuff? Everything good to everyone else? So yeah, give
Bottom
it.
left, if you hit join with audio, you should have that option, kind of.
So yeah, let me know if that's working. We can stop and figure it out. Um, so anyway, my friend who invited me out there, Ido Hardickson, he wrote a really wonderful book called American Trip that's about the history of the idea of set and setting inside psychedelics, and particularly around LSD. It's a wonderful book. It's like a mixture of history and kind of theoretical reflection on this really important idea of set and setting and how it creates different stories about LSD. And it's a really wise book. Like it's scholarly, but it's accessibly written. And you can tell he's ahead too, and he's a total freak, but he's good at playing that game. It's called American Trip, and his name is Ido Hardickson, and he's Israeli. So he invited me to this conference, which was fun because I met all these and Israel has a hardcore psychedelic culture. Like they're very hardcore people. When I went to Goa in the 1990s in India, where there was like this sort of psychedelic psytrance scene, what became psytrance kind of emerged from these freak traveler zones in Goa in India. And so I went to write a story about him, and it was like, there were all the different genres. Like the French people were kind of like this, and the Brits were sort of more sarcastic and funny, and the Germans were very serious and like sort of spiritual or whatever. But the Israelis were just nuts because they'd come out of military service, and so they'd come out and they'd just have to like just get out. And they're also Israeli, and so they're intense. So it's like they were just like on another plane of psychedelic intensity. So it was a really fun conference, and I met Boaz and Galia there. I guess the only other thing to say about the conference that was interesting, two things, is they showed a movie. Chris might know about the name of this movie because it involved practitioners who were working in Israel and following these MDMA therapists as they were working with a few different people, and you got their story and you saw a little bit of clips of their therapy sessions, but they were all Hakomi practitioners too. So it was really like unusual, it was different than the kind of therapy stuff that I had seen, and it was very like touchy-feely in a way that was really interesting, but also like set off some alarms in my head, like, ooh, this might go south. So it was sort of an interesting like slice of their approach to psychedelic therapy. But Rick Doblin was there, right? And he was the only other one speaking in English. Everybody else was at the conference was speaking in Hebrew, so I couldn't follow it. But Rick Doblin was there, and the thing that I hadn't realized about Rick Doblin, which it's sort of obvious and not surprising, but that he's just a full-on flaming Zionist. Like he's like hardcore Zionist, and in an uncritical way. And so it was really interesting being in a hall with these folks as he was like, Israel's da da da, we're MDMA, and like we're gonna da 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 da, and they're like, what, because those are, we were in Tel Aviv where they're like not so happy with some of the major policies of the Israeli state, and it was a very peculiar disjunction in a lot of ways. So anyway, I met these folks there and kept up with them, and they were doing this retreat, and I happened to be in Spain, so I decided to go to this retreat, and it was a really wonderful retreat. It was kind of like a post-Buddhist psychedelic, but not no psychedelics used, but they were, psychedelic practitioners, Santo Daime folk, and there was a really wonderful mix of like Theravada style block, hour blocks of sitting with singing and chanting and walking practice, and then also like forest practice, which was really cool. Something I'd been I'd done sort of casually throughout my life. I'm sure we all have, but where you're really going out and you're like picking a tree and you're like sitting by the tree and you're just doing it. And they were, he was saying like that's one of the interesting things about Buddhism is that I'd never thought about this. It's like in the yogi tradition, in so-called Hinduism, the yogis they always build a hut, right? Or like the Chinese hermits, how they have huts, but the Buddhists sit by a tree. The Buddha sits by a tree. He's outside. So it's like this, the whole distinction between inside and outside as being really an important part of Buddhist practice. And so that we were, invited to go out and sit outside and kind of like really go for it in a way. Like usually I'm a little more casual when I have a meditation outside, and it had that kind of animistic quality. So it was a really wonderful retreat because you were kind of like, it had a sense of depth and rigor. Like these people had been practicing in various traditions, but also practicing in their own lives and coming up with their own amalgam. And there were a couple, so that it had a more that kind of synthesis, and she was more lively. He had more gravitas, da da da. And you really got a sense of it was an interesting experience of like feeling the kind of contact of somebody else's amalgam of traditions rather than like, oh, they were teaching Theravada Buddhism. And it was like, no, they were teaching their own mixture of a kind of post-Buddhist, post-psychedelic way of being in the world. But it didn't have like a new age quality. It was very rich and very grounded. So I really quite appreciate it. They had both, especially she had been a nun, and so was a little burned out on some of the qualities of Buddhism as a kind of, particularly in its Theravada flavor, where it gets really ascetic and such. So it was a very interesting experience. But why I bring it up is that they did this really interesting thing for the first day. So on the first day, and this will be part of the invitation for the meditation, I'm going to change it a little bit, but they said, and you got there in the morning, whatever, 6 a.m., and they said, okay, we're going to have everybody like lie down. And I offered this particular way of lying down, of lying on your side in the fetal position, and put your lower hand on your head, and then your other hand kind of tucked between your thighs. So you're kind of nice and cuddly, like with a pillow or whatever, comfortable. And they said, okay, we're gonna practice deep rest. And so they just kind of, encourage a meditative attitude of just like really resting, really resting, really resting. She's like, if you go to sleep, no problem, no problem. And so we did that, and then we got up, we did some other stuff, and then we're like, okay, we're going to sit again, except we're going to go back in that posture, okay, deep rest. And we're like, okay, cool, And I kept expecting like, okay, we're done with that. We've got the deep rest in. Now we're going to start sitting, because that's the real thing. That's the serious thing. That's when we're sitting upright and we're following our breath or doing open noting or whatever the practice is. But throughout the entire day, through the evening, every sit was actually taking this position and practicing deep rest. And they didn't explain their logic until later. And later on, they're like, look, everybody's getting here. They're so freaked out, and everybody's freaked out, and whatever. There's so much going on in everyone's lives that it's not just about like tuning in a little bit. It's about really getting into a state. And for me, it was really powerful because, leaving aside, some people needed to sleep, so they slept, but most people it was more just about relaxation, and then developing the kind of meditative mind that can be lying down, which for me comes up a lot as people who have been, coming to these for a while know that I often have trouble sleeping. And so I like dealing with insomnia is like kind of part of my practice. And one of the ways is to get into the state where I'm not sleeping, but I'm very calm. And I'm kind of like, I have like open awareness of the space of just resting, and not, trying not to let the mind go too much and just kind of returning, but I'm not actually sleeping. So I was able to really practice with the space in a really interesting way. And it just made me think a little bit more about the subtleties on the rest side of meditation, because, on the surface level, the way we usually meet is that meditation is precisely not about sleeping. In fact, it's defined almost by staying awake. And then that's like the gross level where you're sitting up and you're not lying down and you're not sleeping, you're staying awake. It's almost the opposite. In fact, in a way, it's what's revolutionary about a lot of practices that emerge around the time of Buddhism in the East and the West. Like you read the accounts of early monks or even some Greek philosophers, and it's very clear that like what the goal is to be awake, but like really like in the full sense of that term, not just not be sleeping, but be awake, like be awake to what's happening. And our capacity to wake up in the midst of whatever we're doing is really remarkable. And so it becomes kind of the goal or the tenor of the thing. And then in meditation, we encounter that then more is like getting sleepy and nodding off, or, having that thing. And then there's sort of a tension and even a sense of a struggle often with going to sleep. And it's a very interesting place to be. And if you find yourself, particularly in longer retreats, it's inevitable that you're going to spend some time in this kind of, sleepy zone, is to really practice with that and not, even though in a way the injunction is not to go to sleep, is to wake up, like don't just give in. There's different ways of practicing with that pull. There can be, you can fight it. That's the typical one. Oh, I get you resist it, or you kind of drive your energy up, or you like, shift your attention to your head, or you open your eyes. There's sort of these techniques to kind of resist sleepiness. But there's also ways to kind of like surf it. Like, wow, I'm in a sleepy zone. Like this morning, actually, I was, it doesn't usually happen to me in just a daily sit. But this morning, I was sitting for 20 minutes with my Zen group, and there's two 20-minute periods. And the first one I was super sleepy, and I was like, yeah, but this is going to end in like less than 20 minutes. And then I'll probably get a reboot just by stopping and going to drink a glass of water, which is what happened. So I really tried to just be with it without trying to fight it, but also not just sleeping. And so it's this very fine edge where you're doing and not doing at the same time. And that's what's really stayed with me. And that's kind of what I'm trying to bring forward with this elaboration here of the attitudes towards sleep and waking. There's a subtlety that's available in being with one's sleepiness or one's resting, which is kind of a different thing, where you're still awake, but you're not like mastering it or controlling it. And it's challenging, and experienced meditators will definitely say, yeah, this is a challenging way to go because there's an enemy in the room, and it's one of the most subtlest, enemies of meditation, which is sometimes referred to as subtle dullness. And subtle dullness is where you feel like you're meditating. I'm calm. There's a sense of continuity and flow. My mind I'm not asleep. There's, things are gathered together. But if you look at it right, you see that it's actually pretty fuzzy. You're kind of sinking a little bit, or even a lot, but there's a kind of life to it. So it can be very pleasant. And the orthodox line, which I'm still not really sure about, but the orthodox line is that this is dangerous because it's very subtle and you can waste a lot of time. and that if you just kind of sit there, nothing ends up really happening, and you need a different quality of awakeness to avoid that. So in general, meditation instructions will basically say, if sleepiness is in the room and dullness is in the room, get out of that space, get out of that space. But here I was, also had been traveling. So I was also kind of stressed out, being invited again and again throughout the entire day towards deep rest, which was not sleeping, but it was allowing a full resting in the body and in the mind, which didn't mean going to sleep. And it didn't mean just sinking into a kind of warm fuzz the way you do when you're sleepy and you finally just hop on the bed and you're like, oh. But it was like taking an element of that relaxation and marrying it to presence, to staying awake, to being, or at least being, let's just say presence, a kind of crisp, in the moment presence, along with the practice and the action of relaxing and really relaxing. And, I want to then connect this with two other things that I think are related in interesting ways. So we have this kind of physical practice of relaxing, allowing the body to relax, allowing that to be a meditation too, with a different sense of awakeness, but one in which you're still very much present for what's happening. But that's sort of related to another kind of quality that I've been working with as I've been doing more kind of non-dual practices that emphasize not doing anything at all, just recognizing the always already wakefulness of the mind or of reality, whatever you want to call it. So it's like, I'm not following my breath, I'm not counting mantra, I'm trying to not do anything at all. And I just am not even like making the state. I'm allowing myself to recognize that there's a basic, crisp, radiant awakeness to the mind all the time. And everything else is like the images of the movie, but there is this light coming through the film that is a constant, present, awake radiance, and that you can just be in that. And as you start to approach that and kind of see it almost between or through the objects of all the phenomena that's rising, sight, sense, taste, memories, fatigue, agitation, all of it is kind of a play in this space of basic awakeness, that the meditation instruction in a way is to just rest in awareness. And that has proven to be a very beneficial injunction or protocol, is not just to notice this basic sense of awareness, not just to be in this basic sense of awareness, but to rest in it. Because in a way, it kind of relates to this other more gross sense of resting that we all need, that we all hopefully have times in our lives when we can not just sleep, but also just rest. But this is like the subtlest level of it, where you don't have to do anything. That's the invitation of rest, right? You don't have to do anything. But it's not just like, for me and my, a lot of Zen is like, don't do anything, just sit, whatever, wake up, stop, think, whatever, drop the thought, don't do anything. Maybe you're doing something by dropping the thought, but whatever, don't worry about it, just don't do anything. But it's more like kind of like this paradox or something, like, how can I do not doing, and work with that. And now I'm starting to see in a way a more generous and easier way of not doing, which is to rest, but rest with awake presence rather than resting with full relaxation into sleep. So I invite you in your meditations, however you kind of do them, to, when things are getting still, is to really allow that quality of it is a kind of relaxing or a kind of resting, the way you would rest in the warm sunshine. It's just that the warm sunshine is now that basic radiance of awareness. But there's kind of a pleasure and a sort of release and a sort of almost animal contentment, but at a very subtle level. And so the game is to, again, not, if you go to sleep, you go to sleep. What's the harm in that? It's actually kind of nice. But the game is to, like, how can I bring crispness and awareness into this practice where I'm just sort of resting? So that's the second element of this resting in awareness as a dimension or a kind of higher overtone of this more gross sense of resting, where you're just like relaxing but not going to sleep. And the final connection I want to make, which is a little bit more of a leap, but it kind of just came to me as I was putting this together, and we may or may not get to this in the meditation, depending on, because it's kind of a different package. Maybe we'll talk about it more. Maybe it helps more to talk about it a little bit. But it's just noticing that this has something. I think there's a connection between this idea, this practice of resting with awakeness rather than sleep, but of resting with one of the Brahma Viharas, which are one of these four essential qualities that many different Buddhist traditions emphasize as important to develop. And in the West, we get a kind of, we get a sort of unbalanced picture of these four qualities because we hear much more about some than others. Metta is the one we hear the most about. And so a lot of people practice metta as part of, usually in a Theravadan context. But one of the other qualities, one of the other Brahma Viharas is I think it's called upeksha, and it's equanimity, right? Which you also hear about some. And I was sitting with this and thinking about it more recently. I've been, kind of working with the Brahma Viharas a little bit more in my own life and kind of recognizing how far from the mark I am in so many ways on the emotional plane in terms of like these sort of traditional values within Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism. But I think there's a connection between resting and equanimity that can make equanimity seem less like a brittle injunction to just like not react, or don't let it bug you, or stop judging, or the ways we kind of might push ourselves towards this ideal state of being equanimous, which they describe in different ways. Different texts emphasize different things, but it's basically like you're not attached to happiness or unhappiness. That's already a very rich and interesting place to be. It's also that you're not, it's like you're neither being indifferent towards people, but you're not also overly attaching to them, either to their desirability or to their repugnance or their crudeness or rudeness or whatever. So you're kind of like, it's detachment's the wrong way of thinking about it because that's too cold. Because the text's very specific, like if you're just indifferent, that's not what we're talking about. It's more even-mindedness, right? This quality of evenness, whatever's arising, good, bad, it's not gonna upset me. It's not gonna destabilize me, but I'm present for it. I'm not just like detaching and floating above the crowd. It's not dissociation, right? So that's, excuse me, one of the ways of understanding and kind of experiencing the qualities of equanimity, which is a delightful thing to practice. And particularly, I think I find it hard with other people sometimes. Like people are really annoying. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna do it. Okay, I can do a little bit of it, but just even to notice how we sort of are drawn to some people and repulsed from other people, and just to recognize, how various those feelings are. I mean, they're superhuman. We all feel them. Nothing wrong with it. But to just kind of notice it. But I think for me that one of the places where equanimity starts to become more available and also very helpful in a kind of medicine way is not clinging to the good stuff and not clinging to the bad stuff. To really just kind of let it go through. And it's practicing with the good stuff that's kind of the easiest, right? Because it's like you get it, it's fun, you're happy, you're having a great time, and there's a little part of you that's like, this too shall pass. But how do I practice that and not just be like, oh, everything's going away. The Buddha's right after all. It's all impermanent, even this nice feeling I'm having. That's kind of like a weak way of doing it. Whereas there's a celebration, there's a sort of enjoyment quality that I believe is available as a part of this practice of equanimity. And the great little mini poem, aphoristic poem that I always think of here is, it's like someone just Carter wrote, "Nice feelings are a renewable resource," and it's exactly that quality of renewal that this practice leads to. That's a really good insight, and it's supported by the Blake poem I was just going to quote, which is, "He who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy, but he who kisses joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise." So if you cling to it, you're actually going to destroy it. But it's not just about not clinging and just enjoying it as it goes by. But if you really can let it go, then it's actually always fresh. Eternity's sunrise is like as good a description of where Dzogchen wants to take you as anything, where there's nothing to do anymore. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to make anything happen. You're already there. You're already in eternity sunrise because its reality is constantly fresh. It's constantly, and even though there's miseries within it and your own suffering and horrors and all those things, it's occurring within this sunrise. And so equanimity can be, there's this sort of juicier way of practicing with equanimity that has a real, kind of delivery to it. And the way that I've been trying to practice with equanimity is more about resting. It's like I'm involved in the desire, I'm involved in the repulsion, I'm involved in the irritation with the person, I'm involved with the judgment with the person, and there's a part that's like, just rest as a way of like letting go, but not detaching. It's just resting with the situation. And I think that it has that quality, that rest has that quality of equanimity. Like nothing's really going to disturb it. If you're really resting, and you're really in it, then the noise doesn't bother you. You're resting, So it's like the more that's the dominant kind of vibe, there's a way in which that quality of resting supports this diversity of phenomena. It doesn't ignore it, but it allows a kind of gentle being with that is not disturbed by it as well. So all of that to me is all kind of interestingly interlinked with this notion of deep rest that some of it might have fallen with some of you better than others. I'm going to just take a peek at the yeah, seeing the situation with equanimity is the resting. Yeah, that to me has really been a kind of key insight. So, what I want to offer here, and it's a little bit of a risk because of course people might just be like realizing that you're really tired and you want to sleep, but is to for 10 or 15 minutes to actually lie down, maybe take this posture or take one that you're also comfortable with, and then at a certain point we'll stop and then sit up if you want to. If you want to just stay in that position, that's great. But some of us might be like, okay, I'm getting too drowsy, or let's do this other thing. So I'll just offer that about halfway through of sitting up and then kind of working with that. So of course you're welcome to turn off the cameras. You might want to set it up so it's a place that's comfortable to lie down, but there's a pillow there. So when you sit up, you can just kind of hop on that or find something that works for meditation. Uh, and wherever you are at, where of course we're going to pay extra attention and take some extra time to relax. And the one sort of invitation is to see how much you can really let yourself relax while keeping a crisp sense of presence of mind. And if you get fuzzy, don't worry about it. No big deal. It's just, in a way, that's the game. So first off, whether you're on your back or taking this lovely fetal position, that you feel all the places where your body is resting, is touching the ground or the carpet or the pillow. And really connect and feel and understand just the remarkable way that we are held by gravity, by earth, by the objects of our made world, that we're constantly held. And we're held so much that you can completely relax and you don't become a puddle. You don't become ooze. You might feel like it, but it's always going to be holding you up the way you are now. Gravity's completely reliable. And we can rest even in that reliability, the reliability of the ground we're on. And so connect with that sense of being held by the earth, by gravity. And subtly scan your body, maybe particular parts that you know are feeling sore, or literally just moving through from the head to the shoulders, to the chest, the arms. Go through the joints, move through the legs, your feet, however you're arranged, and invite relaxation. And usually you go through and you'll do it again, and you'll notice, oh yeah, there's a little bit more tension here. I can let this go. I can let this go. I can let this go. And you can't really make it happen after a certain point because it's too subtle. But by just bringing the attention and the invitation to just let go, relaxation spreads. A feeling of glorious feeling of release. And it might even help to think of the way you feel when you get into bed after the end of a long and difficult day. And that sense of peace, that sense of, at least for now, I'm taken care of. I can just let go. And if you were already a little tired, or it's 9 o'clock where you are, or later, you might notice some sleepiness coming in. And this is where, you're going to find your own way. You can say, you know what, I'm just going to go and kind of have a dozy time here. No problem. Or you really balance this sense of relaxation, of warm acceptance from gravity and from the place you are, and probably a place you're very familiar with. It's you're very intimate with, and the way that holds you, balance that with the sense of awareness, of presence. Sometimes as we get kind of sleepy, like we get into bed, we relax, and then the mind just kind of starts to spill around like in a kind of hazy, lazy way, but it's like still doing stuff. It's thinking about tomorrow, it's thinking about the thing that happened. And that's the kind of sense maybe you want to rein that in a bit and really try to bring a sense of presence to where you're at. The breath can be helpful if that's some way that helps you stay present. Feel free. But in this particular situation, I would really just keep returning to relaxing as the object of your practice. Are there parts of the body that seem still stiff, or are there particular points of pleasure, of warmth, of smoothness. It's totally fine to enjoy this opportunity to rest. Notice if the mind is wandering maybe in a different way, a little bit more dreamlike maybe. That's fine. It can actually be really wonderful to explore the dreaminess of this semi-awake, highly relaxed state. It's an altered state all on its own, but we're not doing that now. If the mind is wandering even into dreamy spaces or dozy spaces, just try to bring it back to presence. And that can be the awareness of your body in space. How is your body arrayed? And if you're losing the dimensions of it, then just the sense, the animated energy of the body and its qualities is a lovely way to bring the mind in. But let's explore this for a bit. So within this relaxed situation, focus on the quality of resting itself. And in particular, the resting of the mind or the awareness in this body that itself is probably successfully resting at this point, hopefully. And rather than think of the work you must do to bring the mind back from some distracting thought to presence, experience that shift as a deeper rest. That as the mind starts going through memories or picking up sensations or kind of losing focus or losing presence, that's the agitation that you're resting. So the awakeness, the presence becomes more and more the center and the substance of resting. So you're letting yourself go, but into presence. If it helps, be present with the breath. It's often a good way of gauging how settled the mind is or how distracted. And again, if there are distractions, rather than letting them go or pushing them away or bringing the mind back to the breath, the only instinct, the only gesture is to rest. And if you find yourself able to rest, probably the challenge you might be experiencing is getting fuzzy. getting dull. And this is harder to offer instructions on exactly how to refresh the mind in the midst of deep relaxation. But it's something about that eternity sunrise already being the nature of your mind. And the brightness, the crispness, the radiance of sunrise, of the fullness of the now, is already there. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to make anything happen. It's more a kind of recognition. If this doesn't land, no big deal. But find some way to refresh the mind in the midst of this deep rest. Again, if you're dozing off and enjoying and feeling good and need the rest, don't worry about it. But if you can, or if it seems worthwhile, keep that presence. And now I'd say we've reached a fork in the road. Rester's choice. I'm going to invite those who want to bring a little bit more animation back to the body and consider sitting up and getting into a meditation posture, and as much as possible retaining this perhaps juicy and yummy sense of relaxation. But if you're really into it, just keep it going for the next 15 minutes or so. Meditation will stay more or less the same for you. But for those who are up for it, again, part of the practice then is to move the body slowly, gently, with that commitment to rest, but take a position that requires a little bit more activation, at least to get into, and to some degree to hold. When you sit up, in a way, your body is already making a move towards awakeness. We're human beings. When we become erect, we're out and about. We're doing things. We're engaging with the world. We're awake. So even as you maintain this sense of deep rest, just by sitting up, we're like creating another kind of container. There's another message or another gesture layered on top of our experience of rest. And here it's kind of a little bit more of an experiment for you, where you see, as you maintain your concentration or sense of presence, how things have shifted. Perhaps you're like, I want to lie down again. And I can't see you, so I can't stop you. But perhaps more interesting to sit with that feeling. What else arises? So here you can breathe into the relaxation of the body, but again, bring that quality of resting presence to the breath. And here, the quality I'm really interested in you exploring is the rest of presence itself. So as you're meditating, perhaps the way you're familiar with, or if not, really experiencing the deep relaxation of the body and this call to stay awake, to stay present, is how the return to presence is itself a kind of awake resting, a release, even a relaxation. Perhaps there's a sense of the unnecessary complication of so much of our thought, so much of our agitation, so much of our restlessness, the complexification that we bring to our lives, in relation to which we are invited simply to rest. Let it go for now. It'll come back, perhaps with a change. In a way, you're allowing yourself to get comfortable at a deeper level than normal. It shouldn't be strained. It shouldn't be desperate or awkward. Sometimes we need to push ourselves in meditation, but here you're actually just getting really comfortable with just being the awareness, the awakeness that you are. Again, if thoughts come up, distractions, restlessness, just relax and return to presence, which is always already there. So this is rest not as a stage towards sleep or rest as a stage towards whatever, just chilling out. This is rest as a stage towards that sunrise. So you're resting into freshness and vibrancy. See if you can identify that quality at all, even while maintaining a very relaxed body and a restful mind. Resting not as turning off, but as the subtlest of turning on. And here I'd like to do a little doing by bringing something in to our state, cognitively stirring something up. And let's start with something that you are perhaps very attached to, or very much want to happen, or very much desiring, or hungry for, yearning for in your lives, whatever's most potent, even if it's relatively trivial, but it's something that you're really hankering after. The intenser the emotion, the better. And to just see what happens when you bring this in and allow yourself to kind of feel the intensity of the emotion, and see if you can also maintain or touch this sense of radiant rest, so that it's there in all its fullness, all its juiciness, its demand even, and yet there's a space around it that you can also touch very deeply and access almost immediately. This may fall, this may not fall, and you give it a shot. Again, it's not about numbing ourselves. It's not even about detachment, although that can be useful in life. It's being with as a form of resting. Equanimity can feel like a thread that runs through everything. And as you return to it in the midst of the day, in the midst of the comings and the goings and the yearnings and the resistances and the ups and the downs, there's this sort of thread that you recognize, that you are in some sense. There's a familiarity running under everything, and it's a place of resting in the midst of it all. And so with that in mind, bring up something rough. And for better or worse, that's often easier to do than the desirable thing, unless we're like madly in love or something. Someone who bothers you, a situation that you're fretting about, something you have to deal with, a hassle, a fear, a dread. And once again, as much as you can, allow it to arise, like go into it a little bit. Stir it up. And recognize, if you can, the way that the sunrise is still blazing and that you're still part of that sunrise, even in the midst of it, and that in itself might create a different space, a different quality to the experience. Not going to make it go away, not going to solve your problem, but it changes the tenor of the experience, perhaps. And it is kind of like finding a thread through. Our emotions are a labyrinth. We're lost in a labyrinth often of our feelings, our reactivity, our patterns, our habits, other people's patterns, other people's habits, the resentment of having to deal with other people's patterns and getting drawn into other people's labyrinths. And yet, our presence there in the midst of it is always also that thread, because we're the thread. So I want you now to definitely let go of the desirable and undesirable objects. Return to just a sense of resting in the body. Maybe scan through from the head, through the torso again, through the pelvis, through the legs, and recognize and enjoy any energy fluxes, melting honey-like vibrations. Enjoy the pleasure that resting and relaxing can bring to the body and to the mind, and soak in it a bit. All right, let's end the meditation there. Here, this is the equivalent of a big gong, gong.